Check, check, check. Welcome, welcome. Welcome to Shot of Lunch. Let's keep this short and sweet. Next week, we got Alex Cruikshank coming at us, going to give us a talk about the live IoT project that he worked on for the marathon that happened. It had a couple of runners out on the course, scanning their brainwaves and broadcasting it back for folks to see what was going on with them as they progressed through the course. Pretty cool project, interesting parts to it. Should definitely come out to that next week and see how he did it. I believe we have an announcement from Richard, right? Couple quick announcements.
So just a couple meetups coming up next week. Monday night is Python. I see your Python t-shirt. Monday night, it's here at the Edney on the 5th floor at 6 o'clock. That's Justin's group. I thought I'd pitch that for him. And then my group is Tuesday night, and that's DevOps, and we're back in the corner in the conference room. And Tuesday night, we're going to look at an automation tool called RunDeck. I'm currently evaluating it, so I'll tell you how much I love it or hate it, one or the other, by Tuesday night. So come and see that if you'd like. Hope to see you then.
All right. Any other announcements? Anybody else want to say anything? No. Okay. That's pretty much it. We're looking for speakers for May and June, so if you want to give a talk, come talk to me. That's it. Everybody give it up for Alex. Give it up.
All right. Well, thanks everybody for coming out. I have to let you know I've never done a talk before, so all of you are very intimidating in front of me right now. I'm extremely ADHD, so if I start talking faster than I can speak, just keep that in mind, and I'll definitely answer any questions or clear up anything that I haven't made clear in the Q&A section at the end. So my talk is writing mobile apps with HTML5. I have been doing this for about 2 years. I moved out here and worked for a media and design agency called Video Ideas. It's been around here for quite a long time. But one of the products that we develop is a product called PointsMap. It's a geo-mapping service making it easier for organizations to sort of put their points on a map and update it with data, information, events. It's actually used for Riverbend quite regularly, among other events that happen in Chattanooga. Part of that, though, was we had an interest in developing apps that we can put in the consumer's hands so that they can access PointsMap wherever they are. If they're roaming around, they can find out where things are. And we quickly found out that developing native apps for a small company is a lot of work. Like, you have to learn Objective-C or Swift or Java. You have to learn the intricacies of iOS and Android. And unless you have a large team of developers, it's a lot of work, especially for just 1 or 2 people to handle. So there's a number of alternatives, and that's called, the big one is really developing a hybrid app. So a hybrid app, developing it mostly in HTML5. A hybrid app, what is a hybrid app? Well, a hybrid app is the same as any other app. You get it, you download it from the App Store, it's installed on your phone, but it's built with web technologies that we all know and love, mostly, HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. And the way that this works is it's actually hosted inside of a native element that takes advantage of the mobile platform's native web view. And then you end up having APIs to be able to make calls to native hardware using native code for each platform, and then it uses a callback system to feed that information back into your web view so that you can use promises in JavaScript to take advantage of that. So why should you do hybrid? Well, you have a rapid development time. It's well documented. It's a much easier learning curve for web developers than tackling Objective-C. I mean, NS, whatever, references from next step, that's just a lot of stuff that really doesn't make as much sense, to me anyway. And you have access to the native layer through plugins, like I'd already talked about. You end up using debug tools like Chrome DevTools and Safari to debug your app while it's running on a mobile device. And it's just like working in a web browser, except the web browser is an app on your phone. And it's really, really wonderful. You also have a large community with lots of support. You can hop on IRC or Slack channels, and people will definitely help you out. I've had a lot of help myself on this road, and I just love the community. It's really awesome. When you should not go hybrid, if you're a large company like Facebook, or you have a large team of developers that can handle native code, it's really, you can do a lot more if you write it natively. It's a lot more work, but if you have a large enough team and enough money and time, definitely go native. Hybrid is definitely not a replacement for native by any means. If you're doing performance-intensive applications like video processing or augmented reality, if you're wanting to make the next Oculus Rift thing, don't do it with hybrid. Even dealing with 3D.js, a mobile device just really doesn't have the power to deal with that. As with anything that's web, you can obfuscate it, but you can't fully protect it. Java also has this issue with some degree to decompile and be able to view source code. But if you're really, really worried about your code base, it's just really not a good idea to go and go hybrid. So how do we do hybrid? Well, all major platforms have a web engine. Android and iOS end up using WebKit. Of course, Android is has Chromium, which is based off of WebKit anyway. And for the vast majority of this talk, we're going to be focusing on the WebKit engine. But for Windows Phone, if you're into that 1%, you can also use this for Windows Phone. You can also do it for Tizen, Ubuntu OS, Firefox OS. These third parties that really haven't taken off yet, but those are definitely options. So you can actually have one code base that compiles to 5 or 6 different platforms if that's really important to you to have it out there in every possible way. Who's heard of PhoneGap? Who's used PhoneGap? You have my condolences. PhoneGap was the first major, widely known solution for building hybrid apps. And as those few of you who know who have used it, its support has been in an area of flux for quite a while. And since Adobe has acquired it, it's actually become less and less of a thing. But the vast majority of PhoneGap has been open sourced under Apache Cordova. Who's heard of that? All right, who of you have used it? All right, so it's not as bad, especially if you've already used PhoneGap. It's more up to date, already has security patches, very active development community going and keeping up to date whenever Android or iOS revamps their whole permission model, keeping users' privacy concerns, which is a big issue today, asking them for permission to go and access things like your camera, your microphone, your location, asking if you want to have notifications. Cordova makes it really easy to go and use HTML5 to go and access those elements. And ever since Cordova has really been a thing, PhoneGap has kind of phased out, Adobe has really just made PhoneGap more of a build service. So if you are only developing on a PC and want to go and build your app for iOS, you need a Mac, but you could also upload it to PhoneGap and have them, as well as your signing certificates, and they'll go and sign and give you a compiled version of your app that you can then submit to Apple or Android app stores. Already ready to go, but there's some serious disadvantages to that, mainly debugging on those platforms. So I don't recommend using a build service. So Apache Cordova. Apache Cordova is kind of, it's both a command line, and it's also the native layer that your app is inside of. It also acts as the sort of gateway between your code and the native code layer. It provides an API that's well documented for how you can develop your own plugins. There's a plugin for pretty much everything you could ever want already out there and well maintained on GitHub. Many of them by Apache, others under PhoneGap, several third parties. But essentially the way it works is you pipe in your web code. It's then housed inside of Apache Cordova and the native code for each platform you're wanting to deploy to. And then you're provided with a pre-built APK or IPA file that you can upload to your app stores or debug or launch on your device, any of that. It's extremely easy. But if you're writing in HTML5, that's a lot of work to build an entire app with the feeling of it being native with all the UI components, the nice list views, the buttons, stuff that everybody's used to. You can't just have a basic, hello world in, horrible looking serifed font and call it an app. You're not really going to get a lot of people liking your app. So you end up maybe wanting to use some other technologies as well. You want to use Bower to manage your packages. Maybe you want to use Angular to go and make it easier to manage your state rather than having these massive couple thousand line public function JS files. You want to use NPM so that you can have a more efficient build system. You want to have Bootstrap-like styles so that you have a nice looking interface. Maybe you hate writing normal CSS and you want to use Sass, which I highly recommend, by the way. And then if you want to go and be able to use that, you have to install Gulp. There's a lot of stuff and a lot of wiring that has to happen in order to be efficient in building your app. And something that, if you're just doing an app, every now and then, maybe that's okay. But if you want to be able to crank those out and make it so that, I want to just, type in 3 commands and, have a sandbox ready to go with all of my environment stuff already ready and not having to clone a GitHub repo. Well, Ionic solves this problem. Ionic takes everything that I just mentioned, and it's packaged as a stack of technologies. You already have Bower to manage your HTML dependencies. You have NPM already installed, of course, if you're using Cordova or Ionic, so you can take advantage of that even further. You already have a Gulp workflow already built with watch tasks and live reload for your project. You have the ability to, in one command, go and have it add a Sass build system. Ionic is based on AngularJS, and it uses UI router. The reason why it uses UI router is, who else is familiar with AngularJS? Okay, a few of you. How many of you really love the default AngularJS router? It's not really that great. You don't have as much flexibility managing your states of your application. UI router solves this problem by allowing you to go and specify templates and nested states of your application, so you can have sort of like a window within a window, and then you have access to all of the functions that the parent window or parent state has, as well as the child state that you're in. So TLDR, UI router ends up being a core part of Ionic. I definitely recommend reading up and learning how to use AngularJS and UI router if you're going to go and do hybrid app development, because it's pretty hard to use Ionic without it. So Angular lingo, because most of you, or several of you, haven't used Angular, I'm going to go and give you a Cliff Notes version of some things, some concepts that I'm going to be using during my demo, just so that I don't go totally over your heads. Angular is an MVC framework. If you aren't familiar with MVC, it stands for Model View Controller. It's a method of separating out the different parts of your application that you're working with into small, manageable files and components that allow you to go and more easily have a sort of a rapid workflow that is easily maintained. Your JavaScript is for your controllers. That's obviously the code. Your HTML is for templates. That sort of dictates what your view is. And your data, of course, is your model. If you want to learn more about MVC, you should definitely be using MVC. If you aren't using it, there's some things that are beyond MVC that I'm sure others of you can go and know way more about than I do. But AngularJS is an MVC framework, and learning that concept is pretty core to that. So Angular directives. Angular directives are sort of additional attributes you can put into tags or custom tags that allow you to go and bind data into different elements of your DOM. It then allows you to go and pull in data from your controllers, or using forms, you can take that data and pipe it back in real time, back into your controller. And this ends up being the core part of one of Angular's big things, which is called two-way data binding, where what you have on your DOM is its state in the controller, is whatever function is running with it, and you get that piped back out to your DOM if you want to in real time. A good example of this is ngRepeat, a basic repeater that takes for every item in a list, and it'll end up printing out the containing elements within that div. So in this case, for every item in our list, we're going to just print the current item to our DOM. And you'll actually see an example of this here in a minute. Scope. Scope is the link between your controller and your view. If you just declare a variable, it's going to be private and only accessible to that controller, where scope sort of allows you to expose that to your view and be able to take advantage of that in your templates. It allows you to bind properties through directives to and from your view. Dependency injection. We all kind of use a simplistic form of dependency injection. Whenever you bring in a script into your HTML, you end up injecting that dependency, and you're going to be utilizing that. You still end up doing that with Angular, but you only end up injecting the dependencies that you need for that given controller. This helps a lot with code conflicts and also not loading things that you don't need when you don't need them. And it makes it a lot more easy to go and manage what you're doing, when, where, and how. Installing Ionic is super simple. If you don't use NPM, you should definitely use NPM, especially if you're doing web development. You end up installing globally Cordova, which Ionic uses at its core heavily, and of course Ionic. After that, if you want to start a basic app, you just do Ionic start and then the name of the app that you want. And then you can go and launch a browser with a live reload and development just by doing Ionic serve. It's nothing super crazy if you're used to this kind of workflow. So we're going to do a demo, and we'll see how well it works. And wish me luck on that. So I've actually already gone and created a basic project. Make this a little bigger so you guys can actually see what's going on. We'll go into our directory where that is, and your folder structure really isn't anything crazy. You have some native stuff for plugins and your platforms for your build. You have a directory for SAS if you end up using it, but most of the stuff that we're going to be dealing with is in your www directory. And if we go and open that, I'll show you a little bit about what that looks like. Probably not going to be able to see. I don't know how well you can see that, but the default project structure is great for sandbox and quick prototyping. I'd recommend more of an Angular standard project structure if you're working on a large app with lots of components, because most of your controllers in this default are all in one file. It's really not a good idea to do it that way, but for a quick sandbox prototyping, that's kind of how Ionic has chosen to deal with that. So let's explore a little bit. Those of you who have used Angular are already familiar with this. Of course, we're injecting our style sheets and Ionic, which is also bundled with Angular as part of it, already in there. This script reference is for when your app is actually compiled. That's a dependency that's utilized sort of during compile time. But the first thing we're going to take a look at is our app.js file. Inside of our JS, we end up initializing sort of the startup config of how our app is supposed to perform. We're setting up a couple of variables, setting a couple settings, saying, okay, these plugins, put them in this state. We can also tie into the status bar styles, dictate sort of that native component already of how our status bar is going to look in our app. By the style default works for almost every case for that. This is mainly a big iOS thing. Android kind of already has its own status bar. And then comes configuring our router. We end up having initializing a state with a template, and then child states with their templates and using relative directory references. And then we end up defining a controller. Now, all these controllers are already injected using our controllers.js file by name. Let me actually go and show you what this app looks straight out of the Ionic command line already looks like. So we have a couple of some nice stylistic stuff. Of course, you know, when we get to the iPhone 16, of course, we'll have a screen that tall. But until then, we're never going to have a screen quite as tall as that. So the basic app, that starter project that they give you, has a couple of tabs. Good example of how you can go and use Ionic to go and get started quickly prototyping your application. You have a page. On another tab, you have a basic chat with, this actually is a lot of the guys that develop Ionic, but saying, hey, you know, what's going on? You click on it, you can go into that chat window, you can go back. You have iOS style toggle buttons. You have all kinds of UI components that you can work with. This is just a few of them. And if we go and explore through this, it's pretty simple to go and find out, okay, how this is working. But for this example, I'm just going to make a basic to-do list app. So, you know, most of us are developers. We have long lists of tasks that we have to do. We can't remember them all. So we're going to make a basic to-do list app that'll allow us to go and write those down and remember what those are. So I'm actually going to jump to a commit where I've already cleared out a lot of the stuff that we don't need. And we're going to check that out. So now we just have one tab down here. We have our basic page that we already had, and we only have one controller, because we only really need one state for this app. And if we take a look at our template, of course, you know, you have defining your view, go and have your content, give it some padding with a class, and it's just all normal HTML. It's nothing really crazy or intimidating. There's no Objective-C or anything crazy here. So let's clear this out and make a basic list. I assume most of us have used Bootstrap. If you haven't used Bootstrap, you should definitely use it, or Foundation, or some CSS framework that fits your needs. You're going to save yourself a lot of hassle by doing that. Ionic uses Bootstrap's style of styling. It's written in Sass, and if you end up comparing that with Bootstrap's Sass fork, it looks almost exactly the same, except it's more geared towards more of an iOS feel. So we have a basic list. We're creating a class of list, and we're going to go and put in that a couple of items, and you repeat item in list, and spit out that item. Well, where's all that coming from? If we jump back into our controller file, I'm just declaring a simple array, scoped, you know, scope.list, thing 1, thing 2, thing 3, and if I ended up going and adding another one, I can say thing 4, and save that, and of course there's live reload already working for you, making your life a lot easier, and you're seeing that right in front of you. Of course, we can play with this, nice, snappy scrolling. It all behaves the way you expect a native app to feel, except it's in a web browser. So maybe we want to go and make this a little smarter, because you know, this repeater really isn't doing a whole lot for us. So let's go and create a couple of functions to where we can go and dynamically in our app add more things to our list. So we're going to go and check out this next one. We've already created that. Of course, our template has not changed at all. It's still the same template, except we're going and adding a button with another directive. ng-click is a lot like onClick, except that it's calling a scoped function in your controller. If you're going and working in Angular, you really don't want to have a whole lot of public functions. You're really not helping yourself at all. By going and putting your functions inside of a controller, you make it a lot easier to manage your code just within that state of your application. So scope.add, we end up declaring sort of an anonymous function like this. We could go and give it an actual function name, so add as well, and so we could go and use that for debugging, but you don't have to by any means. And we're just going and adding another thing to our list. So thing 1, thing 2, thing 3, add thing 4, thing 5, thing 6. It's just pushing that to our variable, and Angular is already taking that variable and populating our DOM with that. We don't have to do any jQuery manipulation of the DOM in order to go and update our view. It's just doing that all for us, and it makes your life so much easier to be able to do things that way. It's one of the things I love most about Angular. So now that we have a list and we're adding items to it, we need a form input. Our form input, that does require us to go and change a couple of things. If you've done anything with Bootstrap, this kind of thing will look very familiar to you. If you haven't, just know that most of these divs and styles are just making that form look a certain way. The biggest part of this that I want to point out is ngModel. That's going and telling our app, okay, the text input of this form is going to be bound to this variable in our controller, task.text. We jump back into our controller. We're already defining task.text, so we have a placeholder for that. And then on our scope.add function, we're just going and saying, okay, push the contents of that to our array, and then clear it. And I can say, you know, this framework is so cool, and I can add it, and it's just there magically. Nothing crazy going on. So we can go and add items. We should probably also be able to remove them. So let's go and be able to do that. Again, that's just going and adding a couple more things to our repeater. We're just going to add a button, a red button into every item, and we're going to pass in a function that's deleting that item. Now, how do we know which item we're on? If you go back up to the ng repeat, we're actually tracking each item by its index. And by doing that, we can actually pass in the current item's index back into our function when we delete that and use that to tell, okay, this is actually the item I'm wanting to delete. And so we end up just doing a basic, okay, delete item, and we splice that out of our array. So I can say, you know, okay, my new task, add that, and then I can just delete these in any order I want to. Basic to-do list app, most everything's done. But the biggest problem we have right now is if we refresh this, we don't have persistent storage. Now, if you go and do a lot of web development, you've probably taken advantage of local storage. Now, this is no different in an app. We have local storage available to us, and the best part of that is that it is separated from our other apps and our other browsers on our mobile device. So if I end up adding stuff to local storage in my app, you know, I'm not going to have to worry about some other website I'm visiting going and deleting all my data. It's protected inside of my app. And there's already an Angular module already out there that goes and makes working with local storage and the two-way data binding functionality of Angular much easier to deal with. We end up just bringing into our project ng storage using Bower. Ionic already has it set